Hundreds of Israeli left-wing and centrist activists, as well as other protesters, gathered in front of Israel's parliament, the Knesset, to protest against the inauguration of Benjamin Netanyahu's new government. His allies include the religious Zionism and Jewish power parties.
Netanyahu is on trial for graft charges he denies. He has sought to calm concerns about the fate of civil rights and diplomacy since his bloc of nationalists and religious parties secured a parliamentary majority in a November 1st election. The veteran leader has repeatedly pledged to promote tolerance and pursue peace in a bid to fend off criticism of his coalition. But some protesters say the new government is a danger to democracy.
We came to demonstrate against a government that is maybe legal but not legitimate, a government that wants to break down Israel's democracy. After the laws that they are planning to pass, Israel will continue to exist but not as a democracy. They want to curtail the Supreme Court's power. They have among them all the ministers and vice ministers more indictments than women in all of the government. They are anti-LGBT, they are anti-reform, they are anti-Arab population, and we come to say no, we will not have this.
It's the first time that I'm going out something like demonstrate, but it's not a real demonstration. It's the main reason to protect my family, my grandson, and I hope that many people will come in the next 6 or 1 year to do the same. That's the only way that we can fight these criminals and government.
I came to demonstrate against the government that about to rise up in Israel. Horrible government, a lot of criminals are sitting there, and they wish to destroy the Israeli democracy. And we came to demonstrate against it.
This will be Netanyahu's record 6th term as Israel's prime minister. His coalition partners are pledging to lead the country in a new direction.
Africa for Palestine board member Braam Hanekom joins us now to give us his reflections on this development in Israel. Braam, good to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me online.
All right, what are your thoughts? I mean, they're calling this the most religious and hardline government in Israel's history.
Absolutely. I think it's the most right-wing and extremist government that's ever been in power in Israel. I think it's going to really make it difficult for Israel to maintain any ounce of respect from any corner of the world. To have appointed, among others, to cabinet many ministers who have publicly said they don't believe in the right of Palestine to exist as a state, is obviously to reject the two-state solution that Israel has often used as justification for what they've been doing to Palestine, and also notably to include in the cabinet people who are currently illegally occupying houses in illegal settlements currently.
All right, so let's talk about Palestine. What does this mean for Palestine going forward to have a Netanyahu government that's been installed? He's had to make deals with some very hardliners. What does this mean for Palestine?
Well, I think for Netanyahu, let's remember we're dealing with a very corrupt politician, a politician who has been highly discredited, who has used narrow nationalism and has used the red herring of the Palestinian people and their threat to the Israeli people as an excuse to garner support and to get the necessary support he needed to return. So I think that what it means to the Palestinian people is the sugar coating may finally be over. I'm not sure whether Israel can do anything more nasty, more brutal, and more malicious than what they have been doing to the Palestinian people over the last few years. So I would hope that there's not much worse that the Israeli state can do to Palestinian people. But what has really fallen apart for Israel is this sugar-coated image, this impression that they try to give the world that they are supporting democracy and that they are the only democracy in the Middle East, and that they are trying to engage in meaningful dialogue between the Palestinians. This cabinet and the return of Netanyahu is the rise of Israel's own Donald Trump, and this government is going to really struggle, I think, to maintain the international support that Israel has, which it should never have had for what it had done. But with this government, I think Palestinians will now see the world less likely to accept Israel on their platforms. So there is a silver lining, but of course, it's hopeful and wishful thinking that Israel won't behave in a worse manner. So we really, really do need to watch carefully and see what kind of violence and atrocities Israel may want to mete out now that they have their own Donald Trump.
He issued something that he called a guiding principle for his new government. He says the Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all areas of land of Israel. This can only mean occupation continues and will expand, particularly in the West Bank.
Absolutely. I mean, I think their intentions are very clear. But I must say that under successive Israeli governments, this occupation and land grab has continued and increased. So, I mean, I think Netanyahu is just saying more brazenly and more overtly what Israel has always been up to, at least in the last couple of decades. So I think that there's no doubt that Israel sees all the land as theirs and has treated it as such. Even if Israel were to declare the whole of Palestine Israel, which they basically have, and steal all the land, they would still need to deal with the reality of human beings in the form of Palestinians living on that land. And that's kind of what they've been dealing with for the last couple of years anyway. So I think that Netanyahu is going to be a much more difficult politician to present and try to get legitimacy at the UN and in the international community, because he says things in a way that most Israeli politicians tried to sugarcoat. He says them quite blatantly, quite brazenly, and he's edged on, of course, by an extremist cabinet and by a right-wing voter base and support base, which have put him in there with the sole intention of a Jewish nationalist state that doesn't respect democracy or the Palestinian people.
Yeah, talking about a cabinet, I'm seeing that a West Bank settler is the new finance minister. But President Abbas has said that any development in the West Bank will have repercussions on the region. What might those repercussions be? Could we see an escalation in tensions and possibly violence?
Most certainly the Palestinian people have a right to defend themselves. This is not a right that's radical. It's under international law. You have a right to defend your land. So when an international or foreign body tried to invade or tried to take your land, you have a right to defend yourself. And I think that Palestinians will most likely rise up in defense of their land. Having said that, we're under no illusion that Israel, with the support of America and a failure of the global community to put enough pressure, will easily, unfortunately, walk over the Palestinian peoples and continue to be the greedy Goliath that consumes and takes and takes and takes from the indigenous people that occupy the land. So I think that there's definitely going to be repercussions from the global community. And I think that's the hope that the Palestinians will have with this government. As for the grabbing of lands, Netanyahu will most likely do it, but so did successive governments that Israel had between now and when Netanyahu was in place previously. So I think that it's just a uglier face of an ugly state that is an apartheid state that oppresses the indigenous Palestinian people more overtly, and in some ways a more honest face of the state of Israel.
America, huge supporter, huge backer, but I suppose that there are some elements that are going to be very difficult for America to defend. We understand that some of the ministers in this new cabinet have a very hard line on LGBTQI rights. This is going to be problematic for America, I'm sure.
I think yes and no. I think that on that issue, I think, America swings between the Republicans and the Democrats who swing on that issue and other variety of issues like abortion and so on. So I think that what will be interesting is when Netanyahu and his government take actions that threaten global stability, which is possible with Iran, and when they more brazenly and in a much dirtier, more overt and more in a much more honest way just steal the Palestinians' land, will the U.S. be able to break away from AIPAC? Will the U.S. Be able to stand up in any which way to hold Israel accountable or not? And I think that it's likely they won't, because it appears that Israel controls the U.S. The U.S. doesn't control Israel. It seems the lobbyists and the Israeli, particularly AIPAC, they seem to have more power than the Democrats or the Republicans, because they get welcomed with open hands, open arms by both sides. And it's almost become a pre-requirement to become president of the U.S. to go and address AIPAC and to promise to increase the military spend to Israel by billions and so on. So it's going to be a real test around whether America can uphold their support of international law. Issues like LGBTI or other issues, I think will maybe be less of an issue than the brazen violation of international law. This time, I think Netanyahu and his government won't even try to hide it.
All right, so we've run out of time, but he's busy trying to get some legal reforms in that will make a simple majority in Parliament able to override the Supreme Court. This kind of power, might that mean he can green light attacks into Palestinian territories?
No, absolutely. I mean, it begins to really bring a lot of attention to the farce of the so-called only democracy in the Middle East. Clearly, what Netanyahu is doing is the kind of behavior that dictators attempt to do, and if he succeeds, we'll have an Israeli dictatorship that's more honestly a dictatorship. But democracy or dictatorship, the fact that there's a nation that represents only one people, not the diversity of people that live in its borders and land, and that there's a nation that continues to steal and occupy illegally under international law Palestinian territories, is enough for us to be very clear. There is no democracy, but if he succeeds in that, it'll only make their oppression slightly more efficient, I think.
Braam, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and your insights greatly appreciated. Ndatenda.
Majida, thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. All right, that's Braam Hanekom, who's a board member at Africa for Palestine, saying that Netanyahu coming back in power is the first steps, perhaps, to bringing into clarity a dictatorship that can only spell trouble for the region.